sure many of you will recognise the opening of that aria, Ich will bei meinem Jesu wachen, for tenor and oboe obbligato from the Matthew Passion by Bach. Normally at this time of year, I and my fellow oboe colleagues around the world would be frantically making and scraping and trying out reeds for the 3 oboes that we need for the Matthew Passion. This year, of course, has turned out to be very different. So instead I thought I'd take the opportunity, direct from my home here in the Netherlands, to tell you a little bit about the 3 oboes that Bach uses in the Matthew. I have them here. This is the oboe that you've just heard, the normal soprano oboe. And behind me you can see the oboed'amore, the oboe of love, standing up there, and the oboed'acaccia, the hunting oboe, is the curved one. The one you just heard me play is an oboe made, it's a copy of an instrument made by Denner, who was a maker in Nuremberg in the 1720s, at the time that Bach was in Leipzig. It's a standard form of all oboes at that time that had been developed actually in the mid-17th century in France by makers there, and they'd taken the shawm and narrowed the bore a little bit, made the bell a little bit smaller, and they used a slightly narrower reed, and they put 2 keys on the oboe, all of which had the effect of making the intonation a little bit more stable than the shawm, and refining the sound somewhat so that it fitted in with the string orchestras that's already existed. So from that time onwards, this type of oboe was used in Baroque orchestras all over Europe. It had bright soloistic qualities, which would match very well with trumpets if called for, but it also blended very well with strings. And this bold, bright sound that it has works very well with the tenor voice in that aria we were just talking about, and very much reflects the strong affirmation of faith that's contained in the words. That the timbre of the oboe really brings that across, I feel. But what about the other 2 instruments, the oboed'amore and the oboed'acaccia? The instruments I play on are both copies of surviving instruments made by the Leipzig maker, J.H. Eikentopf, who, it's fairly clear to us today, developed these instruments at Bach's specific request. Bach presumably wanted more of a range of tessitura and colours in his oboes, and he seemed to really love the oboe, because during the Leipzig years his cantatas and passions contain more oboe obligati than any other instrument, Sadly, and also slightly weirdly, after Bach's death, both instruments became more or less obsolete. No other composer wrote for them again. So we can really think of these instruments as Bach's oboes. Just to remind you of the sound of the d'amore, I'm going to play a couple of snippets from the Matthew, using the d'amore, from the soprano recit Wie wohl, and the following aria Ich will dir mein Herz schenken. So that was the oboed'amore, the alto member of the oboe family. And if you looked at it, it actually looks very similar to the normal oboe. But if I hold the oboes against each other, you can see that it's a little bit longer. And you can also see that the bells are very different. The normal oboe has quite a flared bell, whereas the d'amore has a very rounded and therefore smaller bell. The extra length means that it plays a third lower than the normal oboe, and we also play on slightly wider reeds, which altogether gives this instrument a much more mellow darker sound, slightly muted, because the edge is taken off the sound a little bit. This makes it blend very well with strings and also with flutes. If you think of the last chorus of the first half of the Matthew Passion, O Mensch, Bach very effectively uses 4 oboed'amores and 4 flutes across the 2 orchestras and combines the sounds in a really special, beautiful way. He also very often puts oboed'amores in pairs in all his works, but in the Matthew Passion as well. And that plaintive sound of the 2 d'amores really helps paint the picture of that heart swimming in tears that is in the words of the recit Vivol that I played a little bit of at the beginning of this. And finally the caccia. Here behind me. This is the instrument that people ask me about most after concerts, because often they've never seen anything quite like it before, which is not surprising as there is no modern equivalent to this instrument. It's the tenor member of the oboe family, but very different, of course, from the straight wooden tenor oboes, or ties as they're also called, that were being used in France and England at that time, and which were actually the ancestors of the modern cor anglais today. This is a unique instrument. It's curved. It's made of, the body's made of wood, then covered in leather to keep all the little pieces together and stop the air leaking out. And it's got this wonderful brass bell, of course. You can play it either between the knees like that, or some players play it at the side, but it all depends on the curve of your own particular instrument, what works the best. I think it's that combination of wood and brass that gives it such a special sound. It's soulful, but it's got this brassy projection that Bach used quite a lot, and he chose to use the caccia for some of his most poignant arias. In the Matthew, think of the gorgeous Ausliebe with soprano, flute, and just 2 caccias accompanying. And the alto aria See It, where the 2 caccias take on a very soloistic role in almost a comical, light relief way after all that's gone before. And then there's the wonderful Mache dich with baritone, where the 2 caccias double the strings, giving it this lovely warm colour to the last aria of the work. So I'll leave you now with some caccia sounds, and I'm very much hoping that this time next year we'll all be experiencing the Matthew Passion live in a concert hall, as we should be.